Without further ado, I am very excited to announce our next guest, our next speaker, Port Coquitlam Mayor Brad West. I read about Brad's work on this issue, as many of you I think have, and after meeting with him could really tell that he was in this for the right reason, as somebody to break barriers, as somebody not confined by institutions of old that frankly have served us pretty badly and are killing people. And that he was really in this for the right reasons, to find answers and promote safe and healthy communities. So, when I read that he got the most votes than any mayor in his city, when I read that he was the only one ever to be reelected, it was pretty easy to see why. So without further ado, Brad, and thank you all for being here today. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. That's great. Thank you. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much for that warm welcome. It is a real pleasure to join you this morning to speak about one of the most consequential issues facing our province, and indeed well beyond. I want to thank Kevin and his team for the significant work that they've done to bring this event together, and congratulate them on the launch of the Policy Roundtable on Substance Prevention, Education, and Recovery. I also want to thank the organizers for my strategic seat between Mr. Falcon and Mr. Rustin. I appreciate that. We're often told that timing is everything, and timing of this initiative cannot be better, because British Columbia is in desperate need of a response to the death and misery that's being unleashed upon our people and our communities by fentanyl and other drugs. And that response needs to be based in reality, not ideology. Now, I say fentanyl because I think it's important that we name our enemy. Fentanyl. Over 40 times more powerful than heroin. 100 times more powerful than morphine. A drug that very few people could name just 10 years ago, but today is responsible for the vast majority of drug-related deaths, not just in this province, but in North America. This time last year, I was one of 3 mayors in Canada, the United States, and Mexico to be invited to meet with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken to discuss fentanyl and the heavy toll it's taking on our citizens, particularly in working-class families and communities like the one I was raised in and am proud to represent, and whose concerns are my primary cause. Secretary Blinken wanted to hear directly from mayors about what we're seeing on the ground, and he was especially interested in Metro Vancouver because of our regrettable distinction as being an epicenter for not only death from drugs, but as a hotbed for the web of bad actors that are part and parcel of it. The transnational organized crime groups, the drug traffickers, the money laundering, and all those who seek to prey on and profit off the people of British Columbia. We discussed the reality of the time that we're living in. A time when an individual who thinks that they're using almost any other drug are almost assuredly putting themselves at considerable risk of taking fentanyl, as the dealers seek to increase their profit and further the addiction by cutting it into heroin, cocaine, meth, and much more. But most importantly, we discussed this. 2,511. Not numbers, not statistics, but people. That's how many people were killed by drugs last year in BC, which is more than the year before that, and more than the year before that, and more than the year before that. So what is the response to a problem of such profound magnitude and consequence? Surely, it's to ramp up our efforts, first around prevention and education, as a first line of defense to stop more people from going down this path. In the same way I educate my own 2 young children about the dangers of the world, not born out of some naive belief that I can stop anything bad from happening, but because I have a duty to inform and educate so they can protect themselves. Surely, it's stemming the tide of this fentanyl poison from entering our province by securing our ports of entry and undoing the historic stupidity of leaving our ports without a dedicated police force. Surely, it's going after the drug traffickers and the transnational crime organizations by strengthening our laws, our sentencing, and making their lives a living hell in the same manner that they have done to so many of our fellow citizens. And surely, it's by supporting those afflicted by addiction with care, compassion, resources, treatment, all leading to a goal of recovery. No? Okay. Well, how about instead we legalize possessions of personal amounts of fentanyl, crack, heroin, meth, ecstasy, and see how that goes instead? We know where it goes, don't we? Increased public drug use in some of the most sensitive areas, increased public disorder, with the public being told that their objections further stigma, and worst and most damning of all, increased death from drugs. The very outcome that many experts and activists claimed with much fanfare would be reduced when decriminalization was announced in 2022. As the predictable consequences of this decision played out, and I say predictable because it's clear that that's what it was. I've heard some commentators and apologists say, well, if we only knew that this was going to happen, we would have done it differently, or maybe not at all. They suggest, straight-faced, hoping the public doesn't know how to use Google and can't search Portland, Oregon. I digress because the consequences that played out here, the response from government to all of this was predictable. So what happened next? Well, those who are so wedded ideologically to this so-called experiment followed another predictable path. First was to deny. Deny there's a problem. There's no data. It's anecdotal. It's exaggerated. Or as Orwell reminds us, reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. Now, I must tell you that in the city that I'm honored to lead as mayor, we took a different approach. When the province's decision left no legal mechanism to stop the use of drugs in parks, playgrounds, and places where families and children gather, we stepped in. Port Coquitlam City Council was the first in Metro Vancouver to pass a bylaw shortly after decriminalization that said, in our community, this is still prohibited. And in doing so, we provided our bylaw officers the legality to deal with situations that are simply not tolerable. And by the way, we didn't wait for months or a year. We didn't wait until we had dozens of incidences. We acted immediately the first time it became clear that someone had to do something. It was a 9-year-old's birthday party in one of our premier parks. And the parents encountered an individual using drugs near the children's playground. They politely asked if the person could not do that here, and were told to F off. They called the police, who informed them that they no longer had the power to compel that individual to leave. The next day, they called me. And the next city council meeting, we passed a bylaw. Because I was not going to accept that reality for my community, despite one commentator suggesting that it was a great teachable moment for the kids. Now, after deny, the second response was to denigrate. denigrate those who spoke up, who identified problems, who reported the facts and the stories that bucked the party line and spoke to truth, spoke to reality, and spoke to the need for a different approach. And I must say, there are many of those people in this room today, and I want to recognize their efforts because I believe they were critical in the subsequent change in position of the government, and I think they'll continue to be critical in the work that remains to be done. Next was to delay, we're gathering input from municipalities, and then to deflect, we've struck a task force to look at the issue, just wait for its findings. But finally, after the public raised their voice to a level that could not be ignored, they relented to a degree. Despite reversing course on some elements of decriminalization, the overall response to drug deaths remained grossly inadequate and wrong-headed. And don't for a second think that there aren't a chorus of voices both inside of government and out who don't want to return to where we were a few short months ago. In fact, for some of them, their desire is to go much further with even less restrictions. Now, there are many good and well-intentioned people who I happen to disagree with on this issue, and that's okay. But my biggest objection to the approach that they prescribe is that it's defeatist. It aims low. It resigns the people who desperately need support and help to being permanently in the clutches of addiction. It cloaks itself in the veil of compassion, but delivers no change. Because recovery is possible. I've seen it with family members, and I've seen it with friends. Recovery is possible, and recovery must be the primary goal. For every person, that may look different. The path may take longer with twists and turns and setbacks and comebacks. But our response, our policies, our system, and our government must have recovery as the primary goal. I was speaking to my stepbrother recently, who is in recovery after an opioid addiction took him from the cusp of the NHL to the downtown east side, and then to jail. He now dedicates his life to speaking about his journey to young people. He called me up because he read a quote from a government minister that said, "The goal of decriminalizing drugs is to reduce the stigma that prevents people from reaching out for help." He said to me, "Brad, what stopped me from getting help wasn't stigma from drugs being illegal. It was a 16-week wait for the type of treatment that I needed. That's what stopped me." We have a long way to go, but we have a lot going for us. We have many good people who know that better is possible and want to be a part of making it happen. The public is with us. Tragically, there are fewer and fewer families in this province who are untouched by the harms of drugs. And I believe the public is more than ready to support a response that is fulsome, comprehensive, based in reality, and that includes supporting the required investment of taxpayer dollars to deliver what's needed. And finally, I would say to you that there are moments in time when we are called to confront the threats that gnaw at the foundations of our society. And this is such a time. Fentanyl is killing our people. It's devastating families, destroying lives, and enriching predators. And it will not stop unless it is confronted and ultimately defeated. I, for one, am ready to do my part, and I thank you for doing yours. Thank you very much for having me.